Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Eurosonic Debates panel series. My name is Elise, and I'm the coordinator of Liveurope, the live music platform for new European talents. We gather a total of 16 music venues in 16 European countries, and our objective is to empower them to book more up-and-coming European acts from uncharted territories, thanks to the support of the EU. And I'm very happy to have been invited by Eurosonic and Live DMA to moderate this panel titled Live Music Lockdowns, Venues in Survival Mode, a topic that is crucial for us and very urgent to tackle. Because what the coronavirus second wave has shown us once again is the very direct impact this crisis is having on the live music sector. The EU recently published a study where the live music sector is highlighted as the first and biggest subsector impacted in the music sector. And the study shows the huge economic stress this crisis is having on venues, as well as the negative spillover effects this crisis has on the development and the mobility of artists. This is also something that was very well analyzed in the latest Live DMA study that we will also cover today. So we'll be discussing this topic in the next hour with our experts today. So around our virtual table, we have first, let me start with Arne. So Arne, you're an all-around expert on festivals and music venues. So among other things, you've worked for VNPF, which is the Dutch Music Venues Association, and you're in charge of data collection for Live DMA, the European Association of Live Music Venues and Festivals. We also have Anya here. So Anya is the coordinator of the French part of PETZI, which is the Swiss Federation of Non-Profit Music Venues and Festivals. PETZI counts 200 members and also offers to them an ethical ticketing service, which we might tackle also today. And then we also have Beverley. So Beverley is the strategic director of Music Venues Trust, that acts to protect, secure, and improve grassroots music venues in the UK. So Music Venues Trust has been very active during the crisis, which some people in the audience must certainly have heard of with initiatives such as Save Our Venues. And last, but certainly not least, we have Lluís, who's the co-director of the Spanish music venue Razzmatazz, and who also happens to be a member of ASACC, the Catalan Music Venues Association. So we have a panel with a lot of representatives of music venues associations, as you have understood, from across the continent, who will give us their own perspectives on the current crisis. And yeah, since it's a live panel, and I believe this is streamed on YouTube and Facebook, I first suggest that we jump right into the conversation with the panelists, but still open the floor for questions from the audience at the end. So if you're watching us, feel free to send us your questions already, and we'll try our best to tackle them at the end. So yes, let's jump right in. Well, to start off, we might want to look at a few figures to actually assess what the damage has been. Arne, you were in charge of the recent Live DMA study that included very striking figures on the impact of the crisis for the live music sector. Can you please tell us a little bit more about them?
Yes, of course. For Live DMA, I mainly do the data consultancy, and I help structure data collection of all the venues in the different regions in the EU. So we've been working on this for the last 4 or 5 years. And finally, last year, we had data from every region in Europe. I will show you a few sheets. I won't bore you with too many data and details, but just in short, these are the Live DMA members. You see we have 20 members in 16 different European countries, the orange colored ones. And in total, we represent over 2,600 music venues all across Europe. In last January, we published a report about the key indicators, the key numbers from these venues. It's quite impressive actually, because you can see here the summary. The 2,600 venues together, they organize over 400,000 music events per year, normally, until this year, of course. And they present almost 1 million live artist performances per year. And it attracts about 70 million people. And also, it provides 10,000 of jobs to workers in Europe. And there is also a huge amount of volunteers. Well, then from March, of course, the pandemic kicked in, the crisis. Based on the numbers that we have from the previous years, we could make quite a good estimation of the loss of, during the pandemic, the loss of artist performances, of audience visits, and also of the income. So yeah, you can see it here. I won't read it all, but it's basically, we calculated that an estimated 70% decline of music events. So that means there's over 600,000 less artist performances this year. And it's only about the 2,600 venues that Live DMA represents. So all over Europe, it must be much, much more. And also because now when the venues reopened, they have high restrictions on audience capacity because of the physical distance, the seated only, the group size restrictions. So the decline of audience visits is even bigger, almost 80% less audience visits. And that leads, obviously, to less income because the main income from music venues is audience income. It's the sales from tickets and the sales of food and beverages. So you can see there's only like 30% income left this year. And I must emphasize, this is an average. So we'll come back later to the diversity of the venues, but this is an average of 2,600 venues. And the last thing I want to say about it, you see below, because one of the main expenses of the venues is their program costs. We can also calculate how much less they spend on the program. And that's almost the same as the less income the artist gets for the artist performances. So you can see that roughly almost 400 million euros less income for artists, only for these 2,000 venues, basically.
Thanks, Arne. It's indeed very striking figures that really help us, put a figure on the reality that our music venues are living every day. And one crucial element that also helped music venues survive the crisis so far is the furlough schemes that were implemented at national level. In the case of the UK, for example, they were supposed to be put on hold, but the retention scheme, the job retention scheme that was implemented was finally extended. So Beverley, can you please tell us a little bit more about the situation on that specific aspect?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was a real concern to all of our venues when it appeared that there would only be support for the teams up until the end of October, because obviously part of what really makes a grassroots music venue, which is what we represent, a music venue trust, such a fantastic place, is the team of people that run it. And they're generally run on quite small teams, but then they have this huge extended team of people, that the technicians, the bar staff, the volunteers, the other people that are involved in developing what creates the atmosphere of a venue. So it was a really frightening time when it looked like the government support was not going to extend further. And it's been a huge relief to know that that is going to help. But of course, that's only part of the picture, because the music ecosystem really includes an awful lot of freelancers who can't really be all covered by a venue's accounts and the funding that they can draw down. So the situation in the UK, and I'm sure in a lot of other countries, is about all of the different people involved in venues looking to lots of different sources to try and sustain the roles that they can play. And of course, with artists who also arguably earn money in the venues, that's been another challenge as well. And that's one of the reasons that some of the venues are looking at trying to do streaming activity where they're not allowed to open to the public, so that at least they can employ artists and crews and some of the venue staff, so that people that are not fully covered by furlough or largely covered by furlough, I don't think anyone's fully covered by furlough, but they can also potentially earn money by doing activity, even if the venue can't be open to the public. So it's a bit of a patchwork situation, but yeah, I mean, I think all of us that work in sectors where there is furlough money available are incredibly grateful for that government intervention to retain those teams.
Very interesting, Beverley. And what you said also reminded me of the situation that we live with in the context of Liveurope. Like, for example, Ancienne Belgique, which is the coordinating venue of our initiative in Brussels. Thanks to the furlough scheme, most of the fixed staff, actually the entire fixed staff, can maintain their jobs, but Ancienne Belgique had to terminate their contracts with 200 freelance workers, and this has definitely have a lot of impact on many jobs on this very level. So in a global scheme, it also is very telling. But well, beyond the economic scope, music venues have also an important role in the fabric of their own communities and their societies. Anya, the network that you coordinate gathers mostly non-profit music venues that are really committed to this aspect. How did they react, and how did they adapt their activities in that sense?
Yeah, thanks for asking. It's been a hell of a road, and it's not the end of the road yet, unfortunately, we were afraid. But I think it's important to underline this, in fact, because of course the core business of our venues is the live music sector, but it's also a very, very big economic sector that's sometimes not considered as much as it should be. And of course, the social role of it is really important. As you said, the community, the neighborhood, it's got a lot, it's got a lot of, it's important for people to come there to see a show, to meet. It's also a very, very important places for people to gather. The cultural scene gathers in those venues, and it's also sometimes where new collaborations are born, new bands can form. It's also important for emerging artists. And I'm thinking also to training programs. A lot of our venues do have training programs, whether it's in offices positions or technical training program. It's also where younger people acquire new skills or can, develop their first project or their first artistic project or a production project. So this is a very, very important part of the role of our venues. And it's also funny to see how many important people people that are occupying today important positions, like in cultural administration, also started their careers in a grassroots venue. So this said, it's been hardcore for them to really being closed down. And I think one of the biggest fear we have towards this question is also that the know-how will disappear, because if our venues were to stay closed much longer, I mean, we're not sure whether the people will be still available and still willing to come back to work. And one of these reasons is also that we do have furlough as well in Switzerland, mainly for employees, but we do have, as in every other country, a lot of the ecosystems freelancers. And for example, the technicians are really struggling right now with the help they get, because it's very little help, and money-wise they need to pay the bills, which they can't. So we know of a lot of people, technician, artist, graphic designer, that actually are changing jobs. So this is quite a big issue for us we're quite worried that they're not going to be available still when we're going to be able to reopen. And another question is also the audience. How is the audience going to react? Because we had a quick restart, pretty short restart in Switzerland in September. We were able to reopen the venues, shows started again with, of course, pretty big measures, but still we could do some shows, and people showed up because they wanted to go back to live music. They were missing it. But we also figured there was quite a high percentage of no shows. So I guess this is also something we're going to be willing to work on, how audience is going to come back to our venues, because obviously this is going to be a challenge. So I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Thank you very much, Anya. And I'd like to go back on what you said on the expertise that music venues have in nurturing talent. And I think that's something that's really important, that we often say that music venues are hubs for new talents. And this is very much the case for a venue like Razzmatazz that you run, Lluís. So you really take to heart your role in the development of new talents. And I also wanted to ask you this question: how did you manage and continue carrying on this mission with the current context?
Well, obviously the whole sector is affected by the crisis, and artists are maybe the most fragile link of the chain, especially in Catalonia and Spain, because we have an old labor regulation since 1986 without any change. And this regulation considers artists only as an employees and does not contemplate artists as a freelance or companies or an intermittent workers. So most of them are excluded of the Corona special subsidies. This lack of subsidies implies that artists, musicians, technicians too, are looking for another way of life due to living of culture and music in Spain is quite difficult. Currently in Catalonia, the lockdown affects all the cultural sector, theaters and cinemas due to the pandemic situation. But before November, all the cultural sector could open with limited capacity except our venues, our music venues, because of our licenses are not allowed to open, being that from the government point of view, we are part of the leisure and nightclubbing sector and not the cultural sector. This is quite a big paradox. So we could organize gigs in theaters, auditoriums, open airs, everywhere but professional venues. And we are trying to change the situation with the help of culture department, but there are some administrative issues hard to solve. So the fact live music we're playing in big theaters, auditorium and open airs with 400 and 800 seated capacity exclude emerging artists who need another kind of smaller venues to play from maybe 50 to 100 capacity. So definitely in Catalonia, this is not the best moment to be a musician and to start your career as an artist. We have a big situation with emerging artists, and now is not a good time for them.
Thanks, Lluís. And as the panel title recalls, music venues in Europe are right now in survival mode. And we've already mentioned it a little bit, but of course, a key element to help them remain open and exist is the level of public supports they are allocated. On this precise topic, the Live DMA study has made interesting learnings on the impact of the crisis between non-profit and commercial venues. Arne, can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Yes, of course, yes. We did the study. We had all the data from the 2,600 venues, as I told you. What we recognized right away is the enormous diversity of these music venues in Europe. And I mean, in different ways, the audience capacity, we have venues from 40 people capacity up to 3,000. But also the legal status is very important for their business model. And now we also learn that the damage from the pandemic is also quite related to this type of venues. I'll show you 3 more sheets, which the diversity. Here you can see it. Basically, there's 3 types of venues. The public venues are roughly said the venues that are run by the governments, that are initiated by the government. So mostly the buildings, the accommodation, and the personnel is paid by the municipality, but that's only 8%. So you could roughly say that the other half of the music venues in Europe is the private commercial ones, the ones that Lluís described, as in Catalonia, They are companies. They don't have a relationship with governments. They don't have subsidies. The other ones are the private non-profit venues, which is, for example, the main type of venue, for example, in the Netherlands where I work, or in Switzerland where Anya works. The effect, it's a lot of numbers, I know. This is the expenditure, the expenses of the music venues. On top, you see it categorized by small, medium, and large venues. Below, you see the difference between the public, the private non-profit, and the private commercial venues. The only thing I want to show with this sheet is the striking resemblance between all these types of venues regarding to the expenditure. You can see basically that they have the same business model regarding the expenses. If they're really small, or if they're really big, or commercial or non-profit, roughly the same share of expenses goes to the personnel, and roughly the same share of expenses goes to the program costs. So there's not that much difference between these types of venues. But when you look at the income side, there's a tremendous difference. On top, again, you see small, medium, large. Well, it's clear that the larger the venue, the more they are depending on the audience income. So I put it like the ticket sales share is much higher for larger venues. And below you see the legal status. And there you can really see the difference. Because public and non-profit venues, they can at least rely on some ongoing subsidies. You see, for example, for the non-profit venues, the average subsidy is 31%. But for the private commercial venues, the average subsidy is 2%, or almost zero for most commercial venues. And that means that now during the pandemic, when you close your doors and you can't receive audience anymore, basically it means you lose your audience income. The ticket sales you don't have anymore, and the catering sales. Well, you can see what the effect is then also from this, because for the commercial venues, as you can see right below, over 88% of their full income is audience income. And it's even more than 88%, because the other income, 10%, is also partly audience income. So for some venues, they lose 100% of their income. So that basically makes it impossible for them to still pay their fixed costs, pay their expenses. They still have their rent they have to pay every month. They still have to pay their permanent staff. They have some other costs. If you lose 100% of your income, it's of course very problematic. While the non-profit venues can still rely often on some subsidies, and that can cover their fixed costs. So basically you could say that the damage for larger venues and commercial venues, it's at this moment it's much larger than for subsidized venues, and you can see. And then I want to add there that Lluís said you don't have a relationship with your government as a commercial venue, and that's also with the support measures now for the pandemic. You see the general measurements like the furlough, etc., in different countries for all the companies. But you also have specific measures for cultural sectors or for music. Well, the venues that already have a relationship with the government and with the municipality are the subsidized non-profit venues. They already have a dialogue with their municipality. So it's easier for them also to get more support money specifically for culture. And for the commercial venues, they really don't have this history of a dialogue and good contacts with the municipality. So that makes it even worse. The damage is much harder for the commercial venues, but it's also harder to get the support for the government. So I think that's one thing I want to point out, that it's important to support the whole music industry, and also the suppliers, for example, that are often commercial companies.
Thanks, Arne. And I think you point out something that is very, very true, is the necessity to support all kinds of music venues, all kinds of actors in the value chains, or smaller or bigger actors. That's a true element in how to resist this crisis.
Yeah, maybe one point is also what Anya said. For example, our main worry, of course, our first priority is to save the venues on short term. Make sure they don't go bankrupt within a few months. But I think our main concern is also the long term, because like Anya pointed out very well, there's a lot of loss of knowledge and expertise. If you let people go, you have to fire people that have really good knowledge and experience for years in the music venues. And also, I think if a music venue goes bankrupt, an important grassroots venue that in the city center of a big city, it will cost society and the government much more money, much more energy and time to rebuild this cultural infrastructure and to rebuild the ecosystem than to help out now. I mean, I think Beverley could probably have a lot of examples if you have.
Sorry.
Yeah, I would just last thing I wanted to add is if you have a small venue in the city center, you fight for your existence already for years to keep that spot, and if you lose that place, then you're never gonna go back to the city center with high rent prices, etc., etc. So I think it's important to save them now, and it's a good investment.
A good message for our audience out there, and yes, that actually makes a good link to my next question, because Beverley in the UK, it's a country that's prone and that's full with commercial venues. And before we had this panel, we were discussing together, and you were telling us that during the crisis, many music venues found themselves applying for the first time to public support, but yet there was still a remaining number of music venues that were not eligible to funding. So my question for you, Beverley, is how did Music Venues Trust support these venues?
Oh, that's a big question, because we've got a lot of venues. We represent around 900 venues across the 4 nations that make up the UK. And like a lot of my European colleagues, there are different bits of legislation in different parts of the countries we work with. So we were looking at working with 4 governments for 4 different funds. So already that's really challenging, and we know the results in England, but discussions are still ongoing in Scotland, and we're still waiting on results of funding it in Wales and Northern Ireland. But in answer to your question, Elise, Music Venue Trust has been doing a lot of work since being founded in 2014, arguing for cultural parity. And by that we mean that even if venues are perceived as being commercial venues and they are set up as businesses, they need to be recognised for their key cultural and social role in the same way that a theatre or an arts centre or a more recognised cultural building already is. And we've actually been quite fortunate in 2020 that some of the work we've done in the previous years, and I have to thank Live DMA a huge amount, actually, some of the work that we've done with our colleagues across Europe and that we've learned from the data gathering that Live DMA do, we had our own data to demonstrate quite rapidly that what was seen as commercial venues very much needed support if they were to endure, because as Arne says, if a grassroots music venue fails, it's going to cost around £500,000 to create a new one. And so the argument with the government was very much that for smaller interventions now, if venues could be sustained, then that would mean that the investment that we would come back for later would be much smaller. So we've done a number of things. We have successfully worked with venues to take them into the sort of the hybrid position where the cultural program that they create is now recognised as being not-for-profit, but the bar is still profit-making. So they're sort of in the middle of some of the other models. And for those venues, applying for funding has become easier because they're more easily recognised as being similar to other cultural buildings. But we really did argue very strenuously that the ones that were seen as commercial also needed the support. And we invested a lot of time and energy in helping venues who were eligible to apply, because Elise, you're absolutely right. Some venues still were so frustrated to not be able to apply for the Culture Recovery Fund that was spread across the nations of the UK. So we still have venues who may not have been in existence for long enough, so couldn't show the accounts history that was required. We also have quite a lot of venues who are very much centered on one person, and their legal status is sole trader. And in that way, they're kind of seen like an entrepreneur or even a freelancer in their own right, even though they run a venue that fulfills the same role as venues with a different legal status. So we're in the position now where we have several hundred venues that have received funding through until the end of March, so they're okay. And now we're looking at the ones that haven't received enough or weren't eligible for that. So as well as cultural funding and a lot of discussion with the governments, we're also working on crowdfunding, and we launched our Save Our Venues program that you mentioned. We launched that at the end of April, and we've just refocused that now in November on the 30 venues across England and Scotland who are most in danger of closing. And the venues that are secure are now encouraging their audiences, as well as music fans generally, to support this 30 venues by making donations, by buying merch, by doing things that will secure this 30. And if we can secure that 30, then others that hit financial problems or realize that they can't manage, then we will focus onto them next. So we're going on a model of, you know, drawing on all the funding that's available, but then trying to deal with small groups of venues remaining and focusing on securing those a small group at a time.
Thanks, Beverley. Thanks, and it's a very, very interesting to hear as an approach, and also going back on, well, what I think is something that comes up a lot in this discussion is the question of, you know, the emergency, like we have to save music venues now, and it's a message that, you know, policymakers don't necessarily seem to hear at the same level everywhere in Europe. In Spain, for example, this is something that music venues are trying to do more, to alert those policymakers. And music venues in Spain have been joining forces in a campaign called El Último Concierto, so the last concert, precisely for this matter. Lluís, you were part of the venues that launched this campaign. Can you tell us about it and what's its impact so far?
Yeah, well, as you know, this 3 weeks campaign was created to make visible the precarious situation of live music sector, and especially the music venues, because at least 15 music venues at the beginning of the campaign, and now I think it's 18 music venues, have permanently closed already. Due to the 8 months lockdown and the lack of subsidies. So we unite to celebrate that could be the last concert with question mark if the administration does not take the necessary economic and political measures to avoid the disappearance of this network of cultural spaces that we consider essential for the development of artists and cultural life of our territory. The main goal was the creation of an opinion state in people which could strain the media and the social networks during 3 weeks in order to raise awareness to the government about the dramatic situation of the sector. We started by intervening the facades of the concert halls with the big question marks, with big posters and with vinyls or paint or depending of the different facade of every of each venue, and with the hashtag the last concert, El Último Concierto in Spanish, as well as each year of foundation and the year 2020 with a question mark, to suggest that the crisis may mean the closure of these spaces, and encouraging people to take pictures of selfies and to move them by social networks. Then the following week, we announced the lineup of each venue with artists who were agreed to collaborate in the campaign, appearing in the concert or giving their names. And in the meantime, we were giving information about the data of the sector, loss of jobs, the history of each venue with pictures, videos, to keep the networks active. And finally yesterday, we had the kick of each venue in a website with 60 different players where people could choose which venue wanting to watch. That this page, this web page is still open. It's elultimoconcierto.com if you want to visit, because you will see the different venues and the different video players of each venue with their artists, and all concerts and activities were without sound. I mean, silence. So the sound of silence was the main character of the concert. So 3 weeks with the constant presence of the campaign in the social networks and the media, and with the final surprise, and the surprise was that the main artist was the silence, and has been received with a lot of support in Twitter and a massive presence of media, TVs, radios. And I have to say that we have attended today to a meeting with the cultural sector and the Department of Culture of the Catalan government. And they have assured us next week we will open again our venues in the same conditions as theaters and cinemas, with seats 50% capacity. This is the first step. And for us, it's a very important step, because the Minister of Culture said that her heart broke every time she saw the big question mark on the facade of our venue. And now, of course, we will continue fighting for more aids, funds, cost reductions, guarantee loans, and the implementation of the rapid test, a very important thing for us. But for the time being, we are very happy with the results of the campaign. I think it worked.
That's that's great to hear, Lluís. Congratulations, and it's really positive news, and more reasons to become and to remain hopeful in the current context. And I think it also brings me to something else that is very interesting, and that is something that we heard a lot in the media, but and I also heard it a lot from the venues that are part of the platform that of Liveurope that mentioned that in a way this crisis, has also changed the way that music venues or cultural operators are having a dialogue with policymakers. And Anya, I was wondering if that was something you witnessed in Switzerland.
Yeah, for sure. We've been in touch with the authorities before. I mean, PETZI exists since '96, so it's been a while. But I think what this crisis brought up is really, I think it was also an opportunity to show them how it works, how the music industry works, because except from those who started their careers in grassroots venues, the others have no idea. They have no idea of the ecosystem, how it works. It's not just a band on stage, or it's just not the band on tour. It's a whole lot of people working behind the scene. And this is something that's really important to underline to them, because we've been told by the government sometimes that we're going to give you some money and there's enough money, but you never claim for the money. But it's not truth. It's just the ecosystem is so wide, and we did get some funds and some help, but we are now in the process to discuss with the authorities on how this help can be adequate to the venues or the artists or the management, just so we can keep a diversity also in the music landscape, because this is also one of our big fears. Like you were saying, Arne, I think, talking about the suppliers before. I mean, if those suppliers are bankrupt by the end of the year, which for most of them it will be the case, well, then who's going to rent the backline or the light or the sound? I mean, who are we going to work with, So that's a big question. And I think one of the good thing of the crisis also is that we've been speaking a lot with other cultural associations, or even within the music business that's most of the time more competitive than alliance, So we managed to actually gather together, and we're speaking a few times a week. And so we work together also with different fields of culture, also theater, dance, other than music. And this is really helpful, and it's empowering to be able to, okay, we don't have the same issues exactly, but we have some common challenges. And so in that way, being able to work together and being heard by the government. In Switzerland, it's a federalism, so it's sometimes very complicated to know where you can lobby. You know, like Beverley, we're talking about 4 different government. We don't have 4 different government, but we have 26 cantons. So at some point, it's very difficult to follow the rules, the restrictive measures, and just to keep up with the new thing, the new laws, the new ordinance that actually change every 2 weeks or 3 weeks. But I think for now, and I can say maybe this in the past 2 weeks, we really, really feel that the work we've been doing since March is paying off, starting to pay off at least. And we are in touch with the parliament. We are in touch with the cultural minister of the different cantons. We even met with the cultural minister of Switzerland last Monday. So we hope that we're going to be heard on what's important for our venues and moreover the cultural sector in its entirety.
Thanks, Anya. Going back to just something that Lluís mentioned about rapid tests, because I know, for example, in Spain, this is something that started to develop, and of course we also have now the perspectives of finding vaccines, which are basically reasons to really remain hopeful. However, it is true that this crisis is looking to last a while longer, and so is their impact on music venues. But yeah, so maybe first, and since we're soon towards the end of our panel, I want to ask a last round of questions before we open the floor to possible questions from the audience. So maybe with ending with a hopeful note, one reason to remain hopeful, for example, on European public funding, is the new preliminary political agreement that the EU institutions reached last week to increase the funding to up to 2.2 billion euro for Creative Europe, which is the funding program for the EU for the cultural sectors. Arne, since you're the one with the most European perspective in this discussion, I wanted to ask you what's your take on this?
Well, yes, actually Live DMA also participated in the campaign to double the Creative Euro budget for the next period. But of course, we are happy with the 600 million extra. And basically, we just hope it will provide more support to music projects, because 2/3 of the money is going to media and audiovisual projects, and around 1/3 to culture. But that's also diverse, and also classical music and theater. But of course, yeah, we are happy with more possibilities. And also, we're advocating for the EU Recovery Fund that the European Union members, so the countries, are getting from the EU. That 2% of that money is allocated for culture and creative sector. So we also want to make sure that the countries that receive the recovery funds from the EU also really at least spend 2% of this EU money in their own region and country for support to cultural and creative sector. So yeah, in general, of course, but I want to emphasize more the importance actually of the local and regional support and structural investments. I mean, the EU money is great. It brings great projects like Music Moves Europe, like Liveurope, like there's many examples. But it's much more important than on a decentralized, I think, on a local and regional level, there's more structural support. And maybe one thing to point out about if you're not able to get subsidies, there even are governments and municipalities that do want to give support, they just don't have the money. They also have a lack of money. But then I want to emphasize the fact that there could be much different support without giving money also for the venues. And that's purely in the rules and regulations, but also help on the liquidity position of the venues. And I think that's also a crucial thing to mention, because a lot of venues might go bankrupt purely because of their liquidity position, and so it could be really helpful for national governments to work on ticketing refund schemes to make sure that people can hold on their ticket longer or get a voucher or can donate their money, but also like tax delays schemes or easier loans. It's not giving money; it's just making the circumstances better and the regulation. So if policymakers think we don't have the money, then there's a lot of other alternatives to also help out the sector.
Basically, there's a variety of different ways to support music venues or the cultural sector. And yeah, you mentioned a lot of different opportunities, and indeed, there's a great complementarity between all of them.
Maybe one.
Since we don't have this much time, I'd rather ask questions to the other panelists first, and then get on to your comments. Beverley, what you in the Music Venues Trust, I think one of the striking elements was your ability to really raise awareness on music venues. I was wondering what was the next perspectives, for Music Venues Trust in the future.
Well, we're always working on lots of things at the same time, but yeah, you're right, Elise. The public awareness of our sector of grassroots music venues and the important cultural, social, and economic role they play in their communities has improved a lot this year. You know, you always have to look at the positives that come out of a really difficult time. And actually, to pick up on Arne's point, one of the things that we're doing is really emphasizing to local government, the ones that make the licensing laws and deal with the venues on the day-to-day, we're trying to emphasize with them the importance of these venues so that going forward there can be better relationships and fewer restrictions on them. So that's a really key thing. But then the other thing we're trying to do in trying to bring the venues over into seeming more like other cultural venues is we're looking at the ownership of the bricks and mortar, the buildings in which venues actually exist. And we're lobbying our government for a particular type of tax break which would make it easier for communities to buy the buildings and those buildings to be community owned, so that we remove them from the commercial rents to which they're subject at the moment. In the UK, 93% of grassroots music venues pay rent as if they were profit-making shops or bars or clubs. And as you saw from Arne's diagrams, they really don't make a profit. They support artist development. They perform this creative and social role. So we're really looking next to see if we can change the way that our venues are owned so that they will be more secure, more sustainable, whatever challenges come our way.
Thanks, Beverley. And like really listening to all of you, I think there's a lot of, if we could make a toolbox, a lot of, different suggestions we could withdraw. Anya, according to you, what would be your key policy priorities to help music venues survive right now?
Well, I think that there's a lot of challenges, but Arne, you said before when you showed the diagrams that the ones with the subsidies could actually cover their fixed cost, which is true in certain cases, but it's not in most of the case of our venues who get like public money between 0% and 30%. So in the third phase of compensation that was put up by our government, the new system now is actually giving allowance to the venues whenever they cancel a show. But the thing is, we are now not into a booking logic because nobody books anything anymore. And basically there's no market at the moment at all. So this is definitely one of the big issues is that we are trying to, instead of having venues book fake shows or their friends or the local bands are trying to do something, we are trying to make the government understand or to make them aware that maybe a fair solution would be to do the allowance on a fixed cost base, because of course those who have enough subsidies could then, you know, if they have furlough and the subsidy, the public money and other income or other help, then maybe they don't need help from the government, but some of them really do need help. And we have, I'd say, at least one, if not more, member at the moment that are really in a very, very bad situation. And if they don't get help before the end of the year, they're going to be closed down. So we are very lucky no one closed yet, on the contrary of Spain and probably UK as well. But this is one of the things to really, well, we are lucky also because the COVID culture law was voted and it will run until end of 2021. So we are pretty sure we will get help for a longer time. But now it's how is the help going to be adequate to the grassroots music venues?
Again, very, very important point to mention. It's supporting the sector as a whole that is key here, indeed. Lluís, since you also wear the music venue cap, there's also a big discussion that is happening now in terms of how music venues deal with this crisis, and it's something we also discussed together before the start of the panel. It's the role of music venues to also, you know, adapt to the situation, and maybe in a world where you know the situation might be prolonged for longer than we think. How is there a role for music venues to rethink their economic model?
I believe it will be very important to rethink our activity to adapt venues to the future, to the close future, and to the rest of the future. But not only for the pandemic, but environmental issues, which are obviously very related one to each other. In my opinion, it is clear that in Spain, where our business model is basically night clubbing, and we were to depend only of the ticketing and the bars instead of the subsidies. You have seen the graphics of Arne with a 2%, 1% of subsidies in Spain only, and we should try to expand our activity during the day with another business model, like offering our spaces to the artists and creators, or teaching models in the music industry, or recording studios, or rehearsal rooms. I mean, daytime activities without big amounts of public, and with a deeper connection with our neighborhood, and increasing our social commitment with our cities. I think it will be very important. And as a clubs and as a night clubbing, we should think temporarily adapting venues with streaming systems for each concert or club session, in order to balance the loss of capacity, because I'm afraid it will take some time to recover our usual capacity. And we also should improve our air renewal and air conditioner systems with special filters, ultraviolet lamps, and other systems to fight against any virus. And in an immediate future, maybe we have to prepare our access systems to check the results of rapid tests, or to guarantee traceability, and of course to offer alcohol gel dispensers and masks and all these kind of things. And perhaps more important than this is to rethink the economic model of the whole live music industry, not only venues. Maybe we should ask ourselves if is it sustainable, these long tours with big trucks, or people traveling by plane around the world, going to a festival, and with all these unsustainable carbon footprint. Maybe not only venues have to adapt to the new times, maybe we have to rethink all the whole music sector.
Thanks, Lluís. I think we have 4 more minutes before the end of this panel. I think there's no questions from the audience so far, but if there is, now is the time to ask them. So please don't hesitate to send them your way. Maybe Arne, I think you wanted to say something, but I think it's maybe a good time if you still.
Yeah, it was an addition to the European funding, so it's not that relevant anymore. But they also released 2 reports last week from Music Moves Europe. One about observatory and one about funding gaps and market trends analysis. And actually, the conclusion of that report from the European Commission was that there are funding gaps and that there are gaps in the ecosystem that they should support more. And then we noticed actually that these conclusions and these reports were published last week, but they were written before the pandemic. So the gaps and has extremely widened, how you say. So I think this is also a good moment with the increase of the budget and their own conclusion that there are funding gaps, plus the higher priority in this crisis to work on that. And I also maybe one thing to add, to agree with Lluís, we didn't really mention that for most venues, club nights are indeed their business model. And that's also for the venues in the Netherlands, for example. I mean, they do a lot of live concerts in the evenings, but half of their audience and half of their income is generated after midnight with club nights, dance parties. And that's really the last thing that will happen again. So even if we can slowly restart the concert business and maybe decrease the restrictions, then it will take, I guess, at least 1 year to get together a full crowd in a club with a party. And that's the moment that actually the economic recovery can start, I guess.
1 year if we are lucky, I think.
Yeah.
I think we have some questions from the audience, but maybe before we get to them, just to echo to what you said, Arne, it's true that the 2 new studies that were published by the EU were mostly written before the pandemic. But what's also interesting to mention is that one of their conclusions, and this is also what I mentioned in the intro, is that, for example, that because of the impact of the crisis on the live music sector, it is becoming even more urgent, and it is enhancing the urgency to tackle the challenges related to the live music sector. So there is connections indeed. Now going to the questions. So first question, when people donate to support music venues in your countries, do they get tax deduction? From Mark Stins.
In Switzerland, yes, you can actually deduce that from your tax.
Yeah, in the UK also. I mean, Music Venue Trust is a registered charity, and therefore, if people donate to the work we do, then yes, again, it's a charitable donation, and therefore you do get a deduction for that.
I think not in Spain, because in Spain we are private. Yeah.
Private
charity. Yeah. There's no tax reduction.
In the Netherlands, for most venues, it depends on their status, their legal status. But for most non-profit venues, that is called an ANPI status. If you give money to them, you can deduct it.
Okay. I think we have another question. Is the emergency support and attention for live music more or less the same in or completely different in different countries?
I don't think it is, but Live DMA actually did a tool that's really interesting on their on their website, which is a map where you can actually click on the different countries and see what's going on, when were the decision made, etc., etc. And I think there is, correct me if I'm wrong, the other ones, but I think there's also the principal hub that's been put in place in the different countries. So I guess to answer that question, if you go look at this map, you will get your answers there.
Yeah, and I think maybe also what Lluís pointed out earlier, I think in some countries, popular music is really recognized as a performing art, and they get much more, and it's a bit rough to say, but you could say the more Southern Europe, the more it's often still seen as entertainment. Yeah. And the more you go north in the Scandinavian countries and also in Belgium, Netherlands, you can see they recognize it more as culture, and then it's easier to get, or they get more support. So the urgency is there's definitely different levels, and like Anya pointed out, you can look it up at the website.
Great. Well, I think now the time is up. So thank you very much to our panelists for coming today and enlightening us with their very interesting perspectives. I also want to thank Eurosonic for organizing this very interesting panel series. Yes, and I want to also conclude with big thanks to our audience for watching us tonight. If you came if you're still there with us, and yes, I wish everyone a very pleasant evening.